Happy International Women's Day, everyone. In order to celebrate, we've got 3 blokes sat around the table telling you why the manosphere is wrong about marriage. This has been a discourse that's been ignited recently between the Daily Wire types and the Sovereign Bra types, the people on the more sensible side of the whatever table. Not that there's ever a sensible side to that particular podcast, and the inheritors of the manosphere. And I belabor that point because there are different generations. And the new types are the likes of Pearl Davis, who we'll be hearing from, Myron Gaines of Fresh and Fit, Andrew Tate, suspicious number of Islamic polygamists. I almost feel like there's a bit of a Mott and Bailey here for saying that, oh, all women are the problem, and this is why we should be a conquering warlord with multiple concubines, but also don't go towards monogamous Christian marriage. Seems to be a bit of a pipeline here, but I wouldn't, suspect anyone of being untoward.
Sorry to interrupt the video, but I just want to let you know that we have a brand new selection of merch on our merch store. These won't be in the store forever, so if you do want them, go and get them now. Thanks very much.
Before we start, I think it is important to put a bit of standpoint epistemology forward. I mean, Carl is, after all, a postmodern traditionalist, so we have to understand that our values are not timeless, but particularly contingent. Yep. You're married, 4 kids.
Correct.
Yep. You're a Catholic. You certainly want to get married and have a bunch of kids. Mm-hmm. And I've got a girlfriend with baby rabies. So I think we're all living our values out here. I think it's relevant because we will see that perhaps some people are either not living their values out or are making a particular political prescription and giving advice to their audience who, for fairly justifiable reasons about divorce courts or breakups, might be resentful. They are insulating themselves from risk aversion and saying this is the way to go when actually it's founded from personal insecurity. And that's not an attack. I think that's actually true. Now, what stemmed this was that Andrew Klavan and Pearl Davis had a quick conversation. And I just want to go through the different positions put forward by Klavan, who's a happily married Christian in his 60s, and Pearl Davis, who's a Manosphere influencer. But as far as I know, Pearl is unmarried, no kids. So yeah, let's just listen to their positions.
Now, I got a home, I got a mother of my children, I got wonderful children, I got companionship, I got love, many wonderful things that I got in getting married, but I'm not sure that as many guys are getting that today. But you seem to be saying that even if you get that, you're kind of getting a bad deal.
What % of women do you think are marriageable under the age of 35?
Oh,
Debt-free.
Yeah.
Debt-free.
Yeah.
No tattoos, no sex work, in shape.
Uh-huh. And
what percent?
Do you think it's smaller? Well, you tell me.
No, these numbers were confirmed by an actuary
uh-huh.
in a world. It's called A World Without Men.
Right.
5%.
5% you think are marriageable? What % of men are marriageable?
No, if 70% are overweight, just by that logic.
So what % of men are marriageable? No tattoos, not overweight.
Well, we're not measured by the same things.
Uh-huh. Why not?
Because men and women are different.
Men and women are different. Okay. But then that kind of brings me back to the thing you were saying about men and women. I don't know. It just, at that point, it doesn't seem as good to me. The idea that men are better at everything. Men and women are different, so they do different things. But the idea of marriage not being...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the idea of marriage not being a good thing for men. This is something we get hit on at the Daily Wire all the time because all of the main male talent at the Daily Wire are not just married, but devotedly and happily married. And so we get people yell at us and say, well, you're disconnected from the culture. And my thought about that is, well, shouldn't you be more like us and instead of us becoming more unhappy in our marriages? If men are not supposed to get married, what is a man's life supposed to look like?
I don't say they should or they shouldn't.
Okay.
I think every guy has to decide for himself.
Okay.
You guys' options are going to be different than a different guy's options. I'm not here to tell men what to do. But I think using a blanket statement, telling men to get married young, without fully understanding women today and the laws is not the wisest.
Right. Well, people who marry...
Because in a business deal, you would never sign a contract in business that the other party is paid to leave. It would not be wise, right? If me and you were to do a business deal together, and if I break the deal, I get your children, half of your stuff, and I can ruin your reputation. You would never do it.
Well, I mean... And
it's not uncommon. But 30% of divorces are malicious.
So
I just thought that was a fascinating clip.
Interesting, yes. It's difficult to know where to begin. So clearly Pearl isn't completely wrong in saying that the landscape is different for our generation, Connor, than it is for the generation whichever boomer bracket Andrew Klavan falls into. But as far as I don't watch the Daily Wire all of the time, but I would imagine when they say men should get married, and they're not saying men should get married indiscriminately and undiscerningly. They're saying that all else being equal, it is a good idea to get married. And
I think they're holding it up as an ideal.
They're holding it up as an ideal, and that means that both sexes being different, as they are, Pearl's right about that, should be demanding and calling forth the best in one another.
I think
they should be trying to complement each other. And that seems to me to be a much better recipe for how we should try to cure the ills of the sexual revolution, talking about the way in which men and women can both encourage and call forth virtue from one another in the service of solidifying that sacrosanct ideal that is marriage. That should be our message. We shouldn't be embracing a sort of zero-sum cynicism.
Well, that's the important thing there. So you're advancing a position of ambiguous complementarity, and so are the lads at Daily Wire, because Claven's baptized into, I don't know if he said Episcopal, I think he might be. Walsh and Knowles are Catholics, and Ben Shapiro's Jewish, and so they've all got their discerning criteria for being of shared faith, shared values, shared commitment to the same trajectory of life. And even though Pearl seems to recognize that men and women are different, she's holding them to the same standards and saying that women are inferior on these metrics. This is why she talks about marriage like a business contract rather than a covenant. She's saying women aren't upholding their half of the bargain, because if they are to compete on the same grounds as men, then they will be inferior. This is exactly why when women entered the workforce, they needed the pill in order to compete on economic parity with men, so they would take less time out of work and they'd offhand their children to a daycare and the like. So even though Pearl is saying men and women are different, she's saying when assessed on the same metrics, men are superior, and that's the difference, rather than, well, they're not even being compared on the same metrics. And of course, under that logic, you can't really justify entering that contract with an inferior business partner.
The problem as well is that when she makes the point that marriage is a risky proposition for men, she is actually appealing to a sort of egalitarianism there, where she says, well, why should a woman be able to take half of your stuff? Well, in a fair world, it is implied that a woman wouldn't, because she's a strong, independent woman who doesn't need a man. And actually, this is a patriarchal holdover from an earlier pre-feminist time.
Right, yes.
And so the only solution that she'd have would be an anti-traditional one, which is contradictory to what I think she's actually advocating for women.
Yeah, yes. It's playing into the ratcheting effects, making us universal unisex standard consumers, rather than having the paternalistic approach of, well, actually, if a woman were to be kicked out of abusive marriage, let's say that's the predominance of divorces pre-no fault, then she would need a means of economic subsistence.
But that's the point, isn't it? The no-fault divorce is really at the heart of this issue. It's like, no, if you get married, you've got to have a serious reason to divorce, which is probably why something like 80% of divorces are initiated by women. If no-fault divorce didn't happen, so if you were to say the law was changed so initiation of divorce for no reason was to leave you without a claim on resources in the marriage, then it wouldn't happen.
I wrote once before that the Manosphere, like conservatives who I think understandably but wrongly misinterpret and misread the Manosphere or the red pill dating sphere as these are sort of they're reviving conservative ideals. They are they are sort of re-enchanting our disenchanted world. I don't think that's true at all. I think that what they're doing is much more like offering a Loveless how-to guide on navigating a post-moral world. So it really, like, people like Pearl, I'm going to get into it, I'm sure, but people like Myron Gaines, people like Andrew Tate, people like Justin Waller, all of these people, they do not actually, they don't speak in terms of a
sentiment,
but they don't speak in terms of us having any kind of, the whole idea of the red pill space is that we are basically, we're stranded on this isthmus of a middle state, and we are not really called to anything higher. All we can do is sort of rummage around acquisitively on this meaningless flat ball of celestial dust. And as such, marriage begins to be spoken about, as Pearl does speak about it, in terms of a business deal, in terms of acquisitiveness, rather than in terms of sanctity and dignifying the human person.
Yeah, especially with epistemology as well. I know I'm throwing red meat to you here. This is the perfect example of Oakeshott's practical wisdom versus technical knowledge. Because
Claven doesn't know anything about it.
Exactly. Claven talks from experience, saying that my wife has enriched my life. I've got beautiful children. I wouldn't be where I am without her. And Pearl says 49% of billionaires are divorced.
It's one of the few. It's one of the few defensible uses of the term lived experience.
It is, exactly. Well, that's why I said we need to stop standpoint epistemology. Frankly, I don't think Pearl's really bringing her own standpoint in here, and I will show her standpoint later because she did once confess to it. Also, something, and look, I don't hate Pearl. I don't. I've spoken to her once before in a very short clip where I said, and I brought up this affiliation at the time. I see a little bit of insecurity in her. She's admitted to. My problem with Pearl is with her affiliation with friends like Tate, Myron Gaines, the other Islamic polygamists who I think are using the manosphere to advance their personal ideological and religious convictions to personal gain. And also, they all rely, as we said, on the egalitarian logic of feminism, even though we revile feminism, because they don't tell men not to sleep around. They just say, oh, because women are doing it anyway, you may as well do it. Well, you're relying on the contraceptive pill, which then made men and women equal in the first place. So you're doing nothing to escape from the paradigm.
But your universe does not exist without that step change in technology and without the moral revolution that went with it.
Yeah, quite. Also, she's pulled this number from an interesting place. So I did a video with Dan on the economics of dating apps. The secret about dating apps is that you can succeed on them despite perverse incentives, because dating apps have a incentive to keep you single, because obviously they don't want to lose 2 customers at a time. But if you're a put together bloke, you're very discerning in your criteria, you will end up meeting someone. Hello. But so Dan cited the book of numbers here, and he actually got lower than 5%. He got 0.5% of women of marriageable prospects.
Oh, okay.
But I also have to also quibble with some of these numbers because, okay, obese and overweight, there's a sliding scale here. BMI is not always correct. Yes, there are lots of obese and overweight women, particularly in the United States, but also doesn't mean you can't lose the weight. Worthless degree, again.
Also, it doesn't mean she's unattractive, necessarily. Like, you know, a woman who's got,
Yeah, wouldn't Kelly Brook technically have a high BMI? But
I'm thinking like sort of Penny Mordaunt sort of stuff.
Oh,
she's not thin, but she's, you know, not an unattractive woman.
Right.
And also the debt point.
Pretty Patel, you know. Anyway,
don't you get AA going? Oh no, it's Dan, isn't it? Speaking of, yeah, and then the debt point. It's like, okay, pretty much everyone has financial debt. I understand that the scales are larger in the US because their student debt system works in a very different way. But and not being funny, who's going to pay that back? Like the petrodollar is going to go kaput before then.
Like this is what love is all about. Like love is about willing the good of the other. It's not about indulgence, and so. Presumably, if you find yourself in a loving relationship in which, whether it's a woman with her husband and he's slightly overweight, or it's the husband with his wife and she's slightly overweight, there is a way of like calling that person to something higher than they're currently achieving. Like if we completely like rid our sexual life and our sort of erotic life and our sort of agapeic life from any sort of ideal of what human beings could be. And I'm not saying a sort of fantasy utopian ideal, or just a real humane ideal of what we can be. If that's just completely written out of the picture, then all you are left with is precisely the kind of cynicism that characterizes the red pill sphere, and which they frankly monetizing. They're monetizing the misery which has resulted from this step change in technology, which has resulted in a revolution in sexual morals. And the thing to be done is to try and reverse that, not to, you know, sort of
accelerate it.
Yeah, accelerate it and just, you know, enjoy ourselves while we can.
I do kind of hate the materialistic aspect of all of this, though. I mean, you know, when I fell in love with my wife, I wasn't thinking about any of these things. I was, you know, in a period of enchantment where you aren't thinking rationally. You're engaging in a kind of fairy tale together.
And that's different from saying you're not thinking, you're thinking irrationally. You mean like reason is transcended in that moment. It's not that reason is absent.
It kind of is. It's not really about reason.
It can be, but should it be?
It's not whether it should or shouldn't, right? When you're genuinely in love with someone, it becomes something else, and it's like living in a fairy tale rather than worrying about debt and, you know, like, oh, that person has a tattoo on their arm or something. It's like, okay, like you're obviously not in the magic of it if you're worried about those things, because what you're thinking is that together you make something that is unique and special and will transcend all of these things.
Right.
And that's what Andrew Clavin is trying to say. He's like, look, my life is golden and rosy with my wife in it. And Pearl's like, yeah, but what about her bank balance? What are you talking about?
This is the thing. It's the manosphere. I think since pickup artistry, frankly, has been an ideology of risk management.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a fear of loss and of rejection and of being insufficient. And I think this is born out as well of men not having present fathers and communities. So actually, there is a void there where online instruction is needed to cultivate a sort of sense of vitality and confidence. But then, as you said, there's a perverse profit incentive to keep these men in a state of arrested and resentful development, sitting there paying to insult the OnlyFans models that go on whatever, rather than getting out and getting a girlfriend and achieving escape velocity from said manosphere. One of the perfect examples of this that you cite in your piece is actually Myron Gaines. Now, I'll skip over this clip, go and watch it in the description, but essentially in this clip, Myron says, even if you find a nice, virginal Christian young girl, you can never be sure that she won't just up and leave you because of the incentives of the divorce courts and because of how much money she can take from you. I have cited this obscure Rumble channel because a week ago when I put the segment together, Myron's YouTube channel was up. Actually, Fresh and Fit have been taken off.
Oh, have they?
It's quite interesting, yeah. They've been deleted as of the last couple of days. I found it out this morning. But here's an illustrative tweet. So Myron Gaines is responding to Sovereign Bra here, who I rather like. He's a very good Twitter warrior. Sovereign Bra goes on whatever quite a lot, and he says this is why men and women shouldn't sleep around. And is Sovereign Bra that guy there? Yes, yeah. I think he's a Christian chap, isn't he? Yeah. I think he's Eva's fella. So Myron Gaines responded saying, "Jesus can't save these hoes, and neither can you. Your trad cons need to realize feminism is here to stay and isn't going anywhere. Adapt to the new normal, or keep getting married by the church and destroyed by the state."
I mean, that's not an irrational thing to say.
It is if you're operating outside of the Christian paradigm, which Drew and the rest of the Daily Wire guys aren't, because you have that sentimental shared interest in saying something.
He what he is the atomized man making rational decisions in the post-liberal world.
Sort of. He's also Islamic. Well, so I think this is the hidden hand coming in here saying, abandon Christianity, boys. Get rid of it. Don't engage in marriage. Also, here's Islam.
Well, he seems to have abandoned Islam. I mean,
well, this is one of the things. So when I wrote my piece about these gentlemen, there it is. Yeah, very kind of you. When I wrote my piece about one of the things that I came up against was the fact that I was making an argument that the Manosphere was fundamentally anti-traditionalist, anti-conservative, and anti-transcendent fundamentally, and they had much more in common, say, with, I think I cite Nietzsche and Machiavelli and who was the third one, Darwin, than they do with, say, Plato or
100%.
On love, or Augustine on love. Like that's clearly the case. I constantly came up against this idea that Islam isn't exactly short on commands. I mean, there are lots of ideals advanced by Islam. I don't rate many of those ideals, but it seems to me that one thing that I do find slightly odd about Myron Gaines and Andrew Tate is that their Loveless ethos, their highly acquisitive materialistic ethos, is as much in conflict with Islam as it is with the sort of things that I
absolutely
trying to counter them with.
In there, you said he's an unwitting disciple of Rand more so than he is of Muhammad. Yes. And you pointed to a thing where he was asked by a girl what would happen if you got in a car accident and you could no longer take care of this woman, because if she is meant to be so indomitably impressed by you because you've amassed so much wealth and you've slept with so many women and you're deigning her with your attention, what happens if you're no longer able to go out and acquiesce resources, because that's the only foundation
you obviously
of the relationship thing. Yeah, and you write in here, the aim, of course, was to test the limits of Myron's all-consuming belief in self-interest against his moral intuitions, and rather than conceding there is something to be said for sacrifice or avoiding the challenge altogether, he said, "I understand that as a man, my duty is to provide and protect, and if I can no longer provide for that, then I'm virtually useless, and that's just the cold reality of the world. The women, in other words, would be more than justified in abandoning their helpless husband. Most tellingly of all, he said, this is how it is in the animal kingdom."
Oh, well, then, if it's good enough for the animals.
Yeah, we are more merely mammalian and transactional, and there's absolutely no sentiment. Now, if you are a man, is that situation you want to end up in? Is this the paradigm you want to adapt to as the new normal, or do you want to seek an alternative that is more sentimental, that actually, if one of you is stricken down by grief or unchosen debilitating illness, or if you have children together and one of those is taken from you, do you want your relationship to just end on merely monetary reasons? I mean, that just seems really cold to me. And so this is what I'll finish on. This is why I'm saying that this is all a risk management strategy. I think it's advanced by men who think that they can monetize off of other men who are not as capable of getting girls and more afraid of rejection, like Myron and Tate. But someone who I do think is managing risk, and it's actually kind of sad, is Pearl Davis. Now, I have this link here because, again, I had this in the show notes. This video was removed in the last week. This video had about 2,000 views. It's a very old video by Pearl. I tracked it down, unfortunately, on the subreddit, so weep for me because I had to encounter Reddit. This is a video that Pearl uploaded from her car years ago that explains why she watches Manosphere content. And it's made me very sympathetic to her, actually.
With the Just Pearly Things YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about a topic that I've been asked a couple times. A lot of guys on the channel, they'll say, how are you so reasonable? How, or even girls, they'll ask me, like, how can you listen to this man talk about all these women being average and all these women, not deserving these great guys, whatever. And I have one answer for you. Low self-esteem. From a young age, I haven't thought highly of myself. I never thought that I deserved a lot, to be honest. I never thought of myself as a queen. And I never thought of myself super highly. I'm gonna just be honest here. From a young age, I was what you call humbled, okay? Most of my friends, right, were generally like more attractive than me. Like if you look at my closest friends, especially when we were younger, right, you know, weight starts to play a part when you get older, but especially when you're younger. I was never the hot friend. Now, I'm not saying I never had female privilege. It's a thing, you know, but most guys, even the average guys you guys talk about so dearly, if they were interested in me, they would ask me about my friend first. And if that didn't work out, then they would come crawling to me. So, yeah, I would say low self-esteem. That's the main one. And yeah, being humbled.
It's actually really sad.
That is quite sad, yeah.
So I think that she's involved herself in the sphere as a kind of risk mitigation strategy because, unfortunately, because of her upbringing, she hasn't felt deserving of a man compared to the other conditions that she's competing with women on. So she's trying to stigmatize that playing field, change the conditions, and make herself more certain.
You can see where the resentment against other women comes from there. Even if a guy was interested in her, he'd go to her friend first, get rejected, then come crawling to her.
So it seems that the manosphere not only stigmatizes sentiment and, as you've rightly pointed out, creates a series of conditions that leads to the abolition of security and love, but also it's a strategy for people who are fundamentally insecure to project their insecurities out into the world and castigate an entire cohort of women just because they've been badly burned or don't think that they compete. It's a covert competition strategy. And so, again, on International Women's Day, we don't hate all women. Actually, they're not all that bad. Some of them are still all right. And getting married might do you some good.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Lads Hours, this one on whether or not cats or dogs are left or right wing. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.